Hi everybody, welcome to the online lecture for Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is about public leadership, so we'll be examining the ways that an organizational leader has to engage with the public through activities such as public relations, delivery of speeches, and persuasive campaigns. Let's start with examining the idea of public relations, or PR. This is a term that we use a lot in leadership. You've probably used it before, and it's another one of those terms that we feel like we have a sense of what it means, but you may have never encountered a specific definition of it before. Our textbook authors give us a specific definition to work with and a list of some of the activities that comprise the idea of public relations. The definition of public relations is influencing audiences through a cluster of coordinated activities. So as a leader, you're trying to influence others, followers, and the public in a positive way so they will think positively about your organization. And you're going about this through a number of different coordinated activities. PR isn't just one thing. These coordinated activities might include things like planning and publicizing promotional events. Sometimes we see an organization sponsoring a road race, a run, or a booth at a fair, or something like that. It might involve lobbying the government for legislation that will have a positive effect on your business and your industry. It often involves the leader writing and delivering speeches and engaging in public speaking activities that we'll examine at more length in just a moment. And solving customer problems, making the customer happy so that they will continue to come back and want to engage with your organization. An important skill for leaders to cultivate is their public speaking skills. As a leader, it's useful to be an effective public speaker because you're often going to be called upon to say something in front of employees, in front of customers, in front of the public, in front of perhaps government officials, and people are going to judge the effectiveness of your leadership and the strength of your organization based partly on how well you handle yourself in these public situations. So we're going to examine several different kinds of public speaking and talk about the pros and cons of each one. The first kind of public speaking we'll examine is called impromptu speaking, where you're speaking with little or no preparation, kind of speaking off the cuff in the moment, giving a spontaneous reaction to something. And this kind of speaking has its pros and cons. The pros are that you can sound very conversational and spontaneous and sincere because you haven't put a lot of thought and preparation into articulating your message in a very specific way, but at the same time, that's kind of the downfall of it as well. Impromptu speaking takes great skill. It's very hard to do well. For most of us, we could start to ramble, we could forget what we meant to say, we could just be off our game that day and not present ourselves as well as we would like. So impromptu speaking is usually best avoided unless you're a very experienced speaker. The next kind of public speaking we'll look at is called extemporaneous, and this means speaking from an outline or notes. Now, if you've ever taken a public speaking class, this is probably the kind of speaking that you were taught there. You probably made an outline of your speech ahead of time, you rehearsed from your outline, and then when you went up front to give your speech, you had some note cards with some key words written on them, but you did not have your speech written out word for word. Extemporaneous speaking is the kind of speaking I'm doing right now. I have a list of things I want to talk about with you on these videos, but I don't have an actual script written out for myself. Now, extemporaneous speaking is what's usually taught in universities because it has a lot of advantages. It allows you to prepare, but it also allows you to sound really conversational. You have a list of the main points that you want to talk about, but you're able to deliver them in a slightly more spontaneous manner. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. Extemporaneous speaking is the kind of speaking that we usually promote in college classes. The third kind of public speaking we'll look at is called manuscript speaking, or Reading from a prepared text. This is the kind of speech where you have everything written down word for word, and then you read it aloud in front of your audience. And I can tell you, after many years of teaching public speaking, students think this sounds like a good idea. This is what students wish they could do, but it takes a very experienced public speaker to do it well. Kind of a paradox there, but you have to be an articulate, confident public speaker to deliver a manuscript speech in an effective way. Think of the president when he delivers an address and he's reading off the teleprompter. He still manages to sound conversational. He makes eye contact with different parts of the audience. He will make gestures. He's able to make the speech come across in an animated way, even though he is reading from a script. That takes skill. That's very hard for a beginner to do. A beginner can sound very wooden and very insincere when they're reading aloud. Plus, it disengages your audience. It really destroys the rapport with your audience because they're not connecting with someone who's just looking down at a piece of paper and reciting words aloud. So this kind of speaking usually is not a good idea for most of us. Extemporaneous is usually a better way to go. The time that you do want to go with manuscript speaking as a leader is if you need to deliver some kind of statement and you need to make sure it's worded just perfectly. Okay, so for example, maybe there's been some sort of breach of contract, maybe there's been a crime committed, maybe there's been some public scandal, and you have to go out in front of a press conference and make a statement about what happened. In a case like that, manuscript speaking can be useful because you want to make sure that you say everything just right, and you want to plan the wording of your statement very carefully beforehand. But in most cases, a more spontaneous way of speaking is more engaging to an audience. Another category of public relations is persuasive campaigns, and these are messages that come from leaders that are trying to convince us to do a certain thing or to think a certain way. There are many different kinds of persuasive campaigns listed in your text, and please review those carefully. You're probably most familiar with two kinds: commercials and political campaigns, and especially during an election year, we see quite a lot of both of these types. I'd like you to take a look at the stages of creating a persuasive campaign, which are listed in the box on page 290, and know what happens in each one of these stages, beginning with a situation analysis and then proceeding to the creation of objectives, creating strategies by which to meet those objectives, staying within a budget, implementing the campaign, and then evaluating it at the end to see what was effective and what was not. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on this process here, but please spend some time with that box on page 290 and make sure you understand what happens in the different parts of that process. As you work through that list of steps in creating a persuasive campaign, take a moment to reflect on why that last stage, the evaluation stage, is so important. Many organizations will go through the first 5 stages of planning and implementation, but not spend enough time reflecting or evaluating on why it worked, why it didn't, and what they should perhaps do differently going forward. So take note of that 6th stage evaluation and be aware of why it's so important. That's our video lecture on Chapter 9. Please read the chapter carefully. Contact me if you have any questions or problems, and I will see you in the next module.